What's on your radar, Briahna?
Well, Robbie, are we about to re-enter a Dickensian era of sending children down chimneys and coal mines without any regard to their safety? Well, Iowan children and the people who love them should be worried. A new bill out of the Hawkeye state would roll back child labor laws, allowing 14 to 17-year-olds to work in mining, meatpacking, demolition, operating guillotine shears, and other dangerous jobs. Unsurprisingly, the bill is backed by big business, perhaps eager to avoid paying living wages to the adult workers who toil so that corporate bosses can take multi-million-dollar payouts and buy back stock, boosting their own wealth in the process. Currently, Iowa laws prohibit minors from working dangerous jobs like working in slaughterhouses, meatpacking plants, mines, or in jobs that involve, guillotine shears, paper balers, circular saws, and other precarious situations. But some conservatives in the state are pushing an exemption that would allow 14 to 17-year-olds to work those dangerous jobs if they're, quote, participating in work-based learning or a school or employer-administered work-related program. That's according to the Des Moines Register. Now, those seeking to take advantage of the exceptions must show that the children will be adequately supervised and trained on safety precautions. See if those 14-year-olds listen up. And that the proposed employment will not interfere with the health, well-being, or schooling of the minor enrolled in an approved program. Which might sound reasonable if you at all believe that asking employers nicely to ensure conditions are safe actually ensured safe conditions. And here's an interesting tell. The bill, which we're supposed to believe presents no risk to minors, for some reason includes a liability shield for businesses. So if a child is made sick or dead due to a company's negligence or the child's own childish negligence, there is no civil recourse for their loved ones. A company could face up to $10,000 in statutory fines, a penance in the context of wrongful death suits. But even that could be waived by the Iowa Labor Commissioner. The bill is sponsored by Republican State Senator Jason Schultz and is backed by several of his fellow Republicans in the GOP-led House, as well as by business interests. And it's easy to see why they're so interested. Per State Senator Claire Kelsey, this is a sign that the labor market in Iowa is in big trouble. Businesses are so desperate to hire warm bodies, she says, that they want politicians to bend child labor laws and eliminate corporate liability. To be clear, one way to attract workers would be to pay them more. Rapid consolidation in the meatpacking industry over the last 2 decades has vastly diminished, as well as vastly diminished union membership among workers, have contributed to wage decline. A 2022 study showed that workers were unwilling to accept meatpacking jobs due to low wages and harsh conditions without a $2.8 per hour wage premium added to the average $15 an hour salary. Health insurance, retirement benefits, and signing bonuses also would help retention, the study showed, but it seems like at least some plants see recruiting kids as a more lucrative path to take. Meatpacking is big business in Iowa, where immigrant labor is disproportionately used in the critical but taxing labor market there. Bernie Sanders famously dominated in the Iowa caucuses precisely because his canvassers went to meatpacking plants in the wee small hours of the morning when workers were actually changing shifts, and they employed translators who could help communicate his desire to provide healthcare guarantees and education security to laborers in East African languages like Amharic and in Spanish. But while a few years ago, these workers voted for Bernie hoping to see legislative changes that would improve their standard of living, they're now seeing state legislators respond to labor deficits by trying to recruit their kids. And it's not just happening in Iowa. A Wisconsin company had to pay $1.5 million to the Department of Labor after it was found to have employed children in dangerous jobs in 8 different states, including Kansas and Nebraska. 102 children were involved, and investigators learned that at least 3 children suffered injuries, including a chemical burn to the face, while sanitizing what are known as kill floors and other areas of slaughterhouses in the middle of the night. And although the company called Packer Sanitation was forced to pay the maximum civil penalty allowed under the Fair Labor Standards Act, that mere $1.5 million, it's worth asking, why is the maximum penalty capped at $1.5 million when the company reported $2.72 billion in revenue? Does the fact of the liability cap raise questions about regulatory capture? Are regulators designing fines in a way that meaningfully deter destructive behavior, or are they designing policy to create the appearance of sanctions that are really more like a performative slap on the wrist? Packers Sanitation Services is owned by the Blackstone Group, and the private equity fund has collected hundreds of millions of dollars in dividends. At the same time, they've sent children to clean razor-sharp equipment used to dismember animals. Since Blackstone acquired the company in 2018, OSHA has investigated at least 4 amputations and 3 fatalities of PSSI employees, including a decapitation. As Lauren Gurley reported in the Washington Post, the implicated meat processing plants are operated by some of the country's most powerful meat and poultry producers, including JBS Foods, Tyson, and Cargill. Those companies were not charged or fined in any of this. According to research cited by Gurley, child labor violations are up a whopping 37% between just 2021 and 2022. And the number of children working in hazardous occupations like meatpacking and construction have spiked by 93% over the past 7 years, apparently due to a historically tight labor market. Now, over 100 years ago, Upton Sinclair's novel The Jungle exposed the appalling, dangerous conditions in the meatpacking industry. Over 100 years ago, he wrote, "If we are the greatest nation the sun has ever shone upon, it would seem to be mainly because we have been able to goad our wage earners to this pitch of frenzy. We live in a world 100 years later where a Republican Iowa legislator can attempt to pass a bill allowing child labor in meatpacking plants with impunity, a world where our politics are more consumed by the harm caused by, say, African American history lessons than literal children being sent into a Dickensian nightmare. Won't somebody think of the children rings a little hollow coming from the voices of some conservative lawmakers when there's so little outrage about the effort to return our country to standards that seemed abominable in an era before indoor plumbing, and a right populism that would accept lobbying dollars from industries that are crushing bedrock American laborers is no populism at all. The food processing industry spent over $33 million on lobbying last year, and as I always point out, they target both Republicans and Democrats alike. That way, whoever wins a given race, the corporations always win. But Republicans have been the disproportionate beneficiaries here. These food processing groups lobby to keep taxes down and to squash potential legislation, including potential safety regulation. They lobby to thwart antitrust scrutiny that might try to break up anti-competitive business practices. Remember how Amazon purchased Whole Foods and what that's done to prices? And allow meatpacking mergers that have contributed to the sky-high prices at grocery stores. And if this whole conversation about limited liability and statutory penalty caps and regulatory capture sounds familiar, it's because, yes, it's the same issue we've been debating in the context of the East Palestine rail disaster. Corporations are allowed to set the regulatory agenda, and they rig it to make sure they never have to pay enough to actually change their behavior when they wrong you. Trains keep running fast with these same brakes that were used back when Upton Sinclair was alive, with fewer workers to man those trains and workers who are running on fumes because, remember, Joe Biden just broke a rail strike. Win-win for them, lose-lose for the American worker. And I'll say it again, voting for RVD, DVR isn't going to change a thing until we hold the entire system accountable. Money will remain king, and our democracy will remain a mere abstraction until we get money out of politics. Truly, if they can put our kids to work in meatpacking plants with impunity, I'm afraid we've already lost the plot.
Oh, Briahna. Look, I think work can be healthy for people of that age, and if they wanted, I'm not saying they should be forced into coal mines. If they want to work when they're not at school and their parents think it would be good for them and somebody wants to hire them, it's not my business or the government's to say no, is what I would say. I don't have any problem with that.
That's a pretty extreme position, Robbie, and I don't necessarily feel like I need to argue it because I just don't think that there's that many people that feel that way. I think that
don't think
most
teenagers should have a summer job?
I think most people don't think
people don't let their kids work anymore? Is that why they're all depressed and incapable?
I think that most people believe that 14-year-olds shouldn't be working on meatpacking plants in the middle of the night, cleaning guillotines.
I think
that's
I think
literally
hard
the job
work
we're
is
talking
good
about.
for. I mean, you're hearkening back to an earlier era and saying things were always better then.
No. Things were worse then.
Kids
it was
worked
horrible then. Kids were dying in factories back then, and we should not go back.
If your
to
issue
there.
is the employers, the factories need the liability fix. Again, yes. Again, if they harm people, if they're negligent, I do think they should pay. I've said that in all the discussions we've had on the railroads, but that doesn't. I mean, the work should be safe for adults and for kids.
It should be.
Kids. I don't have this. I don't like fetishize kids not working and just being at home on their smartphones all day. It doesn't seem like it's better for them.
That's just a straw man, Robbie. The law already allows kids to work. It allows kids to work jobs that aren't especially dangerous. That's why I read all of those caveats off at the beginning.
Jobs that are especially dangerous.
Well, no, maybe some people like Glenn Greenwald would say and maybe Upton Sinclair would say the intrinsic visceral horror of what it means to work in a slaughterhouse and to consume animals is something that no human should be engaged in. I'm actually frankly open to that argument, but that seems to be a little bit at odds with your argument that people should be able to do whatever labor they can profit off of and free enterprise and
I'm not going to bring the government into. I mean, this is what I'm saying in all the. I mean, you bring up the curriculum fights or the gender affirming care or all that stuff we talk about. Again, I don't think it's the government's. If it's what the family is fine with and the kid's fine with and some third party is fine with, I don't think it's the government's business. I don't care. I say that for all that stuff, and I'd say that for this stuff too.
I appreciate your position. The natural consequence of that is to basically not have any labor laws whatsoever, to say that people can agree to engage in whatever contractual labor relationship and that an employer has no obligations, that there should be no...
I didn't say the employer should have no obligations. You should be able to, again, sue to right harms. That I have no problem with.
Look, I respect your position that you think that there's no job too dangerous for a 14-year-old.
Now who's strawmanning who?
That's literally the law, Robbie. That's literally the law, to let 14 to 17-year-olds do extremely dangerous.
Allowing someone to do something is not the same thing as endorsing or saying it's a good idea. I just don't think it's any business of the government's.
Okay, so it has been historically the business of the government because communities have come together and said that it is wrong and exploitative for young kids to be working certain kinds of jobs. That has been the standard in the Iowa law and most laws across the country for over, for decades and probably close to a century. We feel like as a community that we like to have certain kinds of laws that express our values. If your value is that you think it's appropriate for kids to work in these conditions, that's fine. But people have been outraged over this law because the broader American mentality is not that kids should be dismembering animals in the middle of the night. I'm not on board with this
new thinking that kids are not adults until they're like 35, and we see the effects. They're miserable. We see their self-professed mental health rights.
I'm sorry. Your argument is that kids will
we've delayed adulthood until.
Your argument is that 14-year-olds will be happier if they get to work in meatpacking plants.
They might learn something. They might build. I mean, look, this is a conservative way of thinking, but it has been a way of thinking.
In meatpacking plants, and coal mines.
I mean, if that's what's available, I don't know that that's the best thing for them to be doing. But again, it's not any of my business. If I had a kid that age, I could work it out with them and whatever I thought was best. And so can families out there. I trust the families. I don't trust the government.
All right.
Well, we'll see. That's my take. That's Briahna's take. We'll see what people think.
All right. Well, we're rising for you right after this.